This is TWiT.
This is a news story that has been sort of front of mind for me recently. I've got, I talked about this a little bit on TechNews Weekly, but I've got a couple of friends who are from mainland China originally, have moved to the United States, work here, and a friend who has spent most of his life in Hong Kong and considers himself, a citizen of Hong Kong. And hearing the perspectives on those stories and seeing some of the American companies that are wading pretty doggone deep into the appeasement of certain entities and the censorship and things like that are happening. This is getting interesting. And now we've got lawmakers who are saying, Apple, there's some censorship going on here that you're doing with apps for the sake of the Chinese government. And so I wanted to kick this off because I'm curious, sort of the take from within, as it were, and hearing that in comparison to the perspective that I've had of folks who now live in the U.S. but have the perspectives of both mainland China and Hong Kong and where that comes in. So, Renee, what's going on here in terms of lawmakers talking about app censorship at the behest of the Chinese government is the quote.
Yeah, I think it's important. Obviously it weighs in because Apple's an American company and it has to do business under the regulatory influence of America. But this is the same government that a couple of years ago wanted backdoor access into iPhone. So I try to keep the politicians out of it as much as possible because I think they're just going to politic. And I think the bigger concern for everyone is just how much influence China is able to exert over companies that are not in China, and not by going through a regulatory process like in the US or in the EU. And I disagree with a lot of the EU decisions. And I think they are trying to legislate well beyond their borders as well, but at least we have the semblance of some sort of mechanism that we can participate in and try to influence. And with China, there's none of that. We just get an article from an anonymous person in a state-run newspaper that says sigh and you hurt our feelings, and the biggest companies in the world wheel about and dance. And I think that's hugely concerning. And I'm not going to completely steal something that Andy Nako has been saying for years, but a lot of the stuff is some of the stuff is ludicrous. It's done in public. Like being upset at the NBA creates a Streisand effect. It's theater. It's ridiculous, but it makes you wonder what's going on behind the scenes. And there are things I know just by virtue of having relationships with people in Apple, and I can ask questions and get answers to them. Mm-hmm. But there's no public policy about what the U.S. government is asking for, what the Chinese government is asking for. What is the canary that tells us China is asking for backdoor access, like root access, or for security keys? I like to think there are lines that aren't being crossed, but how do we know when those bridges are even being built? And that, I think, is the danger. I think there's a lot of hype because there's so many things happening in the news all at once, the NBA and Hong Kong and universities and all of these things it's a confluence of propel Apple into the news. But underneath that, I think, are a lot of legitimate concerns that we just do not have very much insight into.
Yeah, and so Lori, it seems like that is the reasonable approach to things, to say that we don't quite have, especially this has been one of my concerns too, approaching this as an American and from my perspective, and not having the inside track with the companies and things like that, where it's been very easy for me to sort of criticize things that I see as a right to free speech and all the things that are involved with that. It's just, I don't know how you feel about this, but when I see a company that, it's very easy for me to sort of stand behind and say, oh, look at the cool things that they're doing here, the products that they're making that I love, but also the things that they're doing for the environment and all these positive things. And then to see this and see how it runs counter to what I think of a company and the people behind the company, that's where it's been kind of a bummer for me. Do you feel that? Right. What are your thoughts there?
So I think of this, what's happening currently with Hong Kong and with the Chinese government and all U.S. companies that are they're having issues with the whole subject. what I'm seeing, there's two things. First, that's the Chinese government that's trying to impose their rules and regulations within their own country. And I think global companies have to understand that, and they have to do that. And this is something we definitely have zero understanding of. I don't own an international company. I don't know how that works and how to maintain the different laws and rules within each country. I know that they're trying to do that. All these countries are trying to do that. But where I see the fear coming in, and I've said this before, it's when the Chinese government is now trying to impose censorship here in the United States. That to me is the biggest thing for us to be afraid of right now. It's not whether or not an app is pulled from the App Store in China because Chinese law says the app shouldn't be there. It's when the Chinese government comes into the U.S. and says, we don't like what you did here. And so then the American companies apologize for it and change policies and do things differently because of it. This to me is where we're seeing the most frightening thing to come, which is censorship in the US because of finance, because we're allowing another country to tell us how we should or shouldn't do things. And that is a bigger beast, a demon, than I think any other, what they do in their own country. We should impose or shouldn't impose our own views on that. They are currently imposing their views on us right now by making these companies apologize for things that have been done or said against the Chinese government or in support of Hong Kong.
I think that's very well put. That's that these it's sort of being brought to us, whether we kind of play a full role in it or not. And that's kind of been, again, my concern with this. And we also have Tim Cook. It's a bit of an interesting tie-in here. Tim Cook serving as the chairman at a Chinese business school. So I'm curious, Andy, you are, a full-on journalist and have that perspective. And I want to ask you, is this a matter of companies in the United States looking at optics and trying to do the right thing for their global business, or is this sort of it was just kind of at the wrong kind of time that Tim Cook announces or it's revealed that he's serving as chairman at this business school? Or is this like appeasement? I mean, is this part of the appeasement?
No, I would assume that this has been done sort of this is just the wrong time that it happened. As what I understand is that it's not like being named it's not like being named CEO to the board of a company. It's not like being the CEO of a company. This is something that this organization brings in CEOs for 2 or 3 year terms to advise the educational track, to make sure the students are getting a global understanding of what the business markets are like. Whether Tim has any real business doing that is up to debate. I don't see it as particularly harmful. However, it also underscores for me, it underscores how many signs we have that Apple is willing to do whatever it needs to do in order to keep its Chinese market happy. Mm-hmm. They are not giving outward signs of what they're willing to do to honk off China if they feel as though there's a line that they don't want to cross anymore. I mean, we're talking about for now. The saving grace for Apple has been that. Every time that the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, has made a demand of Apple, they have made demands that only affect how Apple products behave within China and within what China believes as its immediate sphere of influence. So they can say, you can't have any VPN apps that work in the Chinese App Store, and because they believe that. Their territories are their territories. They can also say, and you're not going to have a Taiwanese flag appear in emoji in these other 2 regions of the world. Mm-hmm. The problem happens when if you go into the App Store right now, you can get the Voice of Tibet app, which obviously China is going to have absolutely no part of, and they would probably love to eradicate it if they could. What happens when what happens if the Chinese government says that it really upsets us that you have this this app that is so offensive, that is designed to be so offensive to everyone in China, to remind us of the terrible history that has happened with this province. And so we would wonder why you would want to instigate us by having this app available to so many billions of iPhone users worldwide. What happens when that email happens, when that editorial happens in a communist newspaper in China? Does Apple say, "You're right, we're sorry, we're going to take that down"? We feel, right. Or are they going to point to, "Oh, well, we feel as though this is political speech, and we say right here in our developer agreement, again, everybody, we're not making a decision here. Our hands are tied. We're using this is just developer guidelines that we make everybody stick to, whether it helps us preserve a $40 billion market or not." This is what worries me, and I don't. Yeah. The clock is running out for Apple to make it really, really clear of what their role is on a global stage. And I'll just wind this up by saying that there is no more powerful tool for a government to clamp the irons tighter on its citizens than the phone that they voluntarily put in their pockets every single day. And all the government has to do is simply say, we need to have this surveillance app that's created by the government that has to be pre-installed on every phone you ship in our territory. And that's when that's when every single person gets tracked to a degree even far beyond the ratio of video cameras to citizens in places like Shenzhen. We know what their playbook is, particularly in China, particularly if you are a Muslim in China, and you wonder if this is just practice for softening up the entire entire citizenry for expecting that you are going to have to prove how trustworthy you are and how harmonious you're going to be with the rest of our society here. And if you are, then of course we can give you extra benefits. If you're not, we're going to have to, well, we can't trust you. We can't trust you. That's the sort of stuff that could really, really easily be happened. But just by simply having a leader saying, by the way, here's the official app, you're going to have it on every single phone. And by the way, Apple, every single other phone maker that wants to have an app store within our country, you have to be able to, we don't care what your app development guidelines are. We have to have hardware permissions all the way down to the metal for everything we want to do with this phone. I just want some assurance that while Tim is saying all these positive things about being a global presence and being good for everybody, and also being good to our partners in China, that they are going to be good corporate citizens and not create chaos wherever they step.
That's my big concern. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say there's two things I think or a couple things that I think are worth elaborating on there. One is that because of the current sensitivity, a lot of stuff that would just be normal course of business is getting amplified. Like I believe that university has a ton of US CEOs on it, and they all take turns being chairman. If I was Tim Cook right now, I'd say, "Oh, Zuckerberg, you can have this next 3 years. Call me in like 6. Maybe
destroy
I'll have
them
time.
from
so
within."
Busy. New iPhone launches. Can't do it right now. Really honored to be asked. But that was just it was just his turn out of all the CEOs that are on that list. The other thing is that China, again, is the super obvious one, but we've seen backdoor legislation passed in Australia. France is asking for the same kind of data localization that China is asking for. We've seen Cook, try to engage with the Trump administration in a song and dance that might just be every bit as nimble as with some of the Chinese authorities. He has this relentless pursuit of engagement. And I've said before, my worry is that engagement eventually becomes appeasement. But there are so many things going on that stage that, to me, it's not a China issue. It's if Apple is willing to fight over backdoor access in the US, that's got to be global. And if they're willing to withhold security keys from France and China, that's got to be global, because eventually everyone, or places we don't even think about right now, are going to ask for that. And I'm old enough to remember when BlackBerry installed Squid servers for Singapore and a bunch of other countries so that they could eavesdrop on everybody's BBM messages, and BlackBerry didn't leave the market. They just did it. So all this stuff keeps happening. And I agree with Andy completely. We need white papers to describe the technology, and then we need clear guidance on the policies. Otherwise, we'll never know what's happening.